Today we're going to discuss the top 5 selling titles from DC and Marvel every year of the 1960s and 1970s. So this is the Silver Age era and the Bronze Age era. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about a lot of cool things. The biggest things I want to point out is, and some of you know this, is that DC really was the giant of the comic industry in the early 1960s. Marvel was always there, put out lots of titles, but really was down the list in terms of publishers. Looking at 1960, you can see that Superman was the third best-selling title of the year, but the biggest title for DC, selling an average of 810,000 copies every month. No gimmicks, just a title everyone wanted to read. Superman was the king of superhero titles, as he had been for a long time. And not only that, Superboy was also selling 635,000 every month. Massive sales. Batman was still strong in the early 60s, selling 500,000. And then after that, Jimmy Olsen almost selling as much as Batman, and then World's Finest Comics featuring Superman and Batman teamed up with Robin. Over at Marvel, we only have a few sales stats. Tales to Astonish selling 163,000. This is when it was still a monster title. And Kid Cold Outlaw, you see at 144,000. We don't have sales stats for all titles. It is possible that Millie the Model and Patsy Walker and all their teen titles were actually their best-selling titles, as they had been running for 15 years and had many spin-offs. Now, let's jump ahead. We're going to look at 1966 more in depth. This was the year that the Batman TV show came out, started a massive craze. Batman sales literally doubled due to the TV show, jumping from 450,000 a year in 1965 to almost 900,000 in 1966. So beware, these are the most common superhero comics of the 1960s, are the Batman issues of 1966 and 67. Of course, Superman, Superboy, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, World's Finest all dominate the list overall. Archie, extremely big seller, still with his main title, selling almost 500,000 every month in 1966. Going down the list, we see more DC superheroes. And what's most impressive is Metal Men at number 12, selling almost 400,000 a month, a massive new title for DC. Treasure Chest from Catholic Guild, 348,000 a month. Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, 346. Betty and Veronica, 342. And then we reach Amazing Spider-Man, 340,000 from Marvel Comics. Sales have been increasing every year, definitely growing up the list. Marvel's big title. This is before it got its own cartoon series. Lots of Marvel fans at this point. In fact, many people say that Marvel's storylines and writing actually peaked in 1966 for originality. But this shows you where Marvel really placed, and you can see that we got Tarzan, Flintstones, Fantastic Four comes in. So Marvel has 2 titles in the top 20 overall of all titles selling. After DC, Marvel really is the next in line for biggest selling superhero titles. But it's interesting that back then, nobody was collecting these comics as collectibles. They didn't have any value. They weren't good investments. These were just people who wanted to read these books. Maybe they were collecting them issue by issue and had a collection of comics, but that was about it. Looking at the list a little bit further, you can see Life with Archie, Uncle Scrooge, both outselling Thor. Jughead, Laugh Comics, Brave and the Bold, Bugs Bunny, Tom and Jerry, Korak, all outselling the Avengers and Sergeant Fury. Three Stooges, Donald Duck, Archie's Pals and Gals, Porky Pig, all outselling Strange Tales with the Human Torch. Twilight Zone, outselling Tales to Astonish with the Incredible Hulk. And you can see X-Men just coming in at number 40. All these titles were big sellers. X-Men selling 255,000 a month. That's a lot of copies. Notice there's other Marvel big titles that didn't even make the list. Tales of Suspense with Iron Man and Captain America, not even on this list. But it gives you kind of a breakdown of kind of where we're at. So the majority of Marvel's superhero titles are on this list. Daredevil is another one that didn't crack the top 40 by 1966. So another thing to consider is the average comic these days sells about 40,000 a month. So These comics, all extremely big sellers back then, just for readers, not specifically collectors. Sometimes we have modern comics that sell a lot more copies, but that's usually due to hype, maybe a number one, maybe a first appearance, or more likely, a ton of variant covers. But none of those gimmicks existed back in 1966. People just read titles and characters that were familiar to people. And you'll see that there was a lot of TV influence. Batman, based on the TV show, was the number one selling comic of 66 and 67, and by 1969 Archie would be the best selling comic in North America due to the new Archie TV show. So some of the other fascinating things I wanted you to notice is just in general the popularity of the Superman family. You know, it wasn't just that Superman generally dominated sales, but it was just that all the Superman spin-off titles all outsold everything, and especially outselling all Marvel titles. And a point I will make again probably later is the fact that titles like Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen were so much more popular than Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. And when people say, oh, I noticed that DC Silver Age is so common and nobody seems to buy them, they're not popular. And I go, no, the simple fact is they just sold so many more copies that they're easier to find, especially low to mid grade. They're actually extremely rare and high grade because people didn't take care of their comics in the 60s, no matter what title or publisher it was. And the simple fact is, DC completists probably already have got their copies, so the demand isn't there the same way it appears that Marvel has now with all their 60s Silver Age superhero titles. Okay, so something else I thought would be fun, is to compare the actual top 5 of DC and Marvel for each year now going forward up until 1979. And we're going to notice a couple things, not just what titles sell the best, but we're going to compare the two companies against each other. And we're also going to compare how sales were in general for comics. So when Batman had its big year in 1966, the top 5 DC were selling over 3.3 million copies per month. Extremely high. That's even higher than it was in 1960. That TV show really helped boost sales overall for DC. As I said, Marvel was maybe at its creative peak at this time, but their top 5 best-selling titles were over 1.5 million copies sold per month. And interestingly, Sergeant Fury is in the top 5 as a war title, which was extremely impressive, selling higher than X-Men and Hulk and all those other titles I mentioned. Okay, so now let's look at 1967, see if you notice any changes. Well, Batman is still extremely popular, but it's dropped just a bit down. So keep in mind, these Batman are so common in mid to low grade, but still very popular, as Batman is the most collected DC character. Looking at the Marvel list, it's quite interesting. Spider-Man, for the first time, passes 350,000 copies a month, and Fantastic Four is also over 300. This is the peak year of sales for Thor and Avengers. Now, here's a really interesting point. People will always say that Silver Age is so much harder to find than, say, Bronze or Copper or modern books, but the reality is that's not true. Comics actually sold better in the late 60s than they have ever done since. And therefore, actual sales of these Marvel titles was at their peak literally in 1967, not later in the 70s, even though the titles may have become more of household names at that point. Why is this? It's because overall comic book sales, month by month, year by year, are actually dropping. And we're going to really see that throughout the 70s. Let's look at 1968. Well, the Batman show is gone, so sales have really dropped back to normal. Batman's still doing very well, coming in second place for DC. But Superman is back in his predictable number one spot, still selling over 600,000 a month. Notice that the rest of the top 5, again, Superman-related titles. Over at Marvel, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Sergeant Fury have all increased again year by year, but notice they all peak. That means there were more Amazing Spider-Man comics sold new off the racks in 1968 than any year since. That's an interesting stat to think about. Yes, there have been some highlighted specific key issues that might have had higher sales or variant covers. But this is really month to month, where every issue selling 373,000 copies on average. Thor almost hitting 300,000. Daredevil almost hitting 300,000. So these titles would never sell this many copies ever again. Comics are going to decline. We can see that in 1968, DC sold over 2.6 million copies of their top 5. Marvel sold 1.5 million of their top 5. Now, in 1969, I mentioned Archie had a number 1 song on the radio. Archie had a new TV show, and Archie sales were skyrocketing. Archie was the best-selling title of 1969, pushing Superman down into second place. But predictably, the 5 best-selling DC titles are all Superman-related again. And look at how strong Lois Lane is. Almost 400,000 a month. She is still selling more copies month by month than any Marvel title. And over at Marvel, you will see that sales are just slowly taking a decline. So DC still selling 2 million a month, and Marvel sold 1.4 million of their top 5. Things are really going to get interesting at this point. Inflation kicks in. Comics go up to 15 cents a copy, and this really is going to make a change, and it's really going to hurt comic sales in the 70s. In 1970, Superman, of course, is number 1 still for DC. It's the first year sales are under 500,000, but Superman still dominates the top 5. 1.8 million sold that per month of the top 5. Spider-Man, predictably, Spider-Man Fantastic Four are the top for Marvel, but Conan is a brand new title, comes in charging strong, and would be, this top 3 is pretty well your top 3 for the 70s. Notice Sergeant Fury had another super strong year. Conan sales were strong right from number 1, and really a lot of speculation. This was a hot book right from day 1, and this would become a trend of the 70s that people would speculate heavily on Marvel number 1s. So DC sold 1.8 million, Marvel up to 1.3 million. 1971, again, DC has Superman titles, the entire top 5, and over at Marvel, you can see Thor and Hulk have been increasing in sales, so they're pretty strong right now. Spider-Man, the only title, still over 300,000. DC at 1.7, Marvel at 1.3, and that was the year I was born. 1972, we're getting ready. Comics are going to go up to 20 cents cover price. And it, again, it's hurting sales. Look at the numbers dropping. Superman is just over 300,000. Spider-Man is under 300,000. And the numbers are down. And look at the comic companies. They're getting pretty close now. Top 5 DC, 1.3 million. And Marvel, 1.1 million. 1973... We've got overall sales, again, still dropping. And DC just outselling Marvel a little bit for the top 5. Again, keep in mind, Superman still outselling Spider-Man. Still. And Amazing Spider-Man celebrates its 10th anniversary. But it just can't top Superman yet. We've got Superman-related top 4. Tarzan had a really strong year at DC. 223,000 every month. At Marvel, they debuted a new Spider-Man team-up book called Marvel Team-Up. Big seller. So now Spider-Man's name is really growing at this time. He's got 2 titles in the top 3. 1974. DC, Superman holds the top 4 titles. Batman is starting to grow back in price increases. What's interesting is that Neil Adams had been doing covers of Batman all throughout the early 70s, but yet sales were drastically dropping continually on Batman even during this time. It's only in 74, 75 sales start picking back up to make our top 5. Over at Marvel, look at this. Amazing Spider-Man tops Superman for the first time, but just barely. And the rest of the list is pretty predictable for this time period. And look at the sales of the top 5. The two companies were almost tied. Well, by 1975, comics were 25 cents each. And now Superman has its lowest sales ever, under 300,000 a year. Action Comics has a surprisingly strong year, though. Our Army at War also had a bit of a boom for some reason. And Our Army at War outselling pretty well all the DC superhero books, except for those top 3 Superman-related books. Marvel Spider-Man is still way in the lead, but Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man is in second place. And look at that. Sales of the top 5 from the two companies are equal. In 1976, comics rise to 30-cent cover prices. Sales are fairly steady for the moment. Justice League of America snuck up into the top 5 for the first time. The title is 16 years old. Finally makes the top 5 for DC. Over at Marvel, Spectacular Spider-Man debuts as a brand new series. And now Spider-Man has the top 3 best-selling Marvel titles. So that's making the Spider-Man family of books almost as strong as the Superman family at this time. And again, sales of the top 5 between the two companies are equal. 1977 is a bit of a change year. We've got Star Wars becomes the phenomenon at the box office, and merchandise and everything, and sales are through the roof, and Star Wars issues would be reprinted so many times that they would sell over 1 million copies in general. I don't have the actual sales figure for the first prints, so I just put in 300,000 as an estimate. It could be higher, for sure, for just first prints. But that puts Star Wars instantly in the number 1 position. After that, we've got Spider-Man dominating as usual. At DC, Superman dominates as usual. But Flash had an extremely strong year, making the top 5 for the first time, even though the title had been around 18 years. But look at this. Things have changed. Marvel is now selling more copies overall than DC. So really the Marvel age has totally kicked in. And DC is going to suffer a bit. And we really noticed that in 1978. Superman has got a brand new movie, but that didn't help sales that much. Superman is still dropping. Justice League had a strong year again. Batman cracks the top 5, but look how low these sales are. Only 125,000 needed for the top 5, which is pretty low comparing it, especially to Marvel at this point. So Star Wars again dominates over Spider-Man, and Star Wars 278,000 is an official number, so that's confirmed overall. And again, Spider-Man dominates. Conan strong the entire decade, and Marvel selling more than DC. And ending off the Bronze Age in the 1970s, we've got basically the Superman family still strong at the top, but Batman had a good year, or did he? 166,000, not that strong. And Wonder Woman cracks the top 5 for the first time like ever. 158,000. Of course, there had been a Wonder Woman TV series in the late 70s. Superman was a box office smash, the first big budget superhero movie ever made. At Marvel, Star Wars Mania is still growing. Incredible Hulk had a TV show, and that really boosted sales like crazy. A big success. Fantastic Four surprisingly topped Spider-Man that year. So that's interesting. And Avengers cracks back into the list. So Spider-Man lost his dominance of the top 5 for the first time. Again, the top 5 sales, you can see that Marvel is definitely higher than DC. So lots of interesting things. Just looking at the top 5 alone, compare that to later years. Yes, comic sales have been up and down since the 80s. There's been some boom years where things like Secret Wars, Crisis on Infinite Earths, relaunches of Superman, the Batman movie, the 90s speculation bubble, the death of Superman, and the breaking of Batman. New 52, DC. There's been certain moments in the last 50 years where DC kind of got bumps and might have toppled Marvel for short periods. But overall, Marvel has been the king of the last 50 years. unless you believe that that's now changing in 2025, 2026. Absolute Batman and that whole series has really been outselling all the Marvel titles as of recent. So it's fun to watch history from the point of view of what did people actually buy at the time. So I'd love to see your comments on this. Let's see what you think about all these stats.